Let's go through some of the best graphics I saw from the opening week of the NFL season. So I wanted to make this video for a couple reasons. The first being just a source of inspiration to you all. I figured I could put together some of the best graphics and kind of go through them, analyze them, talk about what they do well, and then also go through some of the techniques that I would use to recreate some of these effects. So let's start with the Chiefs game day graphic from this past Thursday night. Obviously, the colors jump out at you immediately. It's got this really nice gradient going throughout. It looks like they use some kind of gradient map for most of the background. So if you go down to your adjustment layers here and go to gradient map, you can change the colors. And obviously they had some Chiefs red and yellow, and it looks like some kind of dark tone as well, but you get the idea. Gradient maps are a great way to kind of get your team colors going throughout the entire design. So I highly recommend checking those out if you haven't yet. I really like the way they separated the main cutout in the foreground from the background. They just kind of made this like swoopy shape at the bottom and made Mahomes coming out of the stadium. I really like these double shadows we have going on. I feel like that's something I haven't really tried in my graphics, but to create that, I can show you real quick. Just filling a new layer with white and dragging in this Antoine Davis cutout. We can basically command click and select the whole cutout, make a new layer underneath and fill it with black. And then command T to transform, bring this down. And then once you have this shadow, you can hold command and click from this middle tab and then bring it to either side. And then you'd basically just reflect that shadow to the other side, you know, duplicate the layer, edit, transform, flip horizontal, and then you have this like cross shadow effect. You'd want to line it up better with the feet, of course. Really nice effect and a good example of it in this Patrick Mahomes game day graphic. The other thing that stands out is just the game day text in general. It's got this fun liquefy effect going in the background. So this came from duplicating the text, then going up to filter, liquefy, and that allows you to kind of play with and warp text in some cool flowy ways. So that's how this red is coming down. This initial warp, by the way, if you make a new layer, type out some text, we can type out game day. If you like stretch out a font first vertically and then hit your text warp effect, we can go to, this would be arc lower, I believe. And if you change this bend to negative, this is kind of how you get this like almost classic logo style swoop on the bottom part of your text. I also like the motion blur they have in the background here. So if you have your cutout and you want to create some motion blur, you can duplicate it and go up to filter, blur, motion blur to the one behind. And I would just change this angle to 0, make sure it's going side to side. You can mess with the distance as you see fit. And then it looks like in the Mahomes graphic, they sort of masked out where the blur was most visible. So you can see it's not really down around his feet, but most of the upper body has this subtle motion blur in the background. Let's move on to this Texans graphic. I love this concept because it's so typical to just have like big text that says 24 for the 24-hour mark, but they actually use a jersey number, cut it out, and then blew it up. I just think it's a nice alternative compared to your classic text. The balance in general of this design is really good. You have elements on the right side, you have this like blurred text going off the page, but then you also have these hyphen lines over here. You get a couple logos, you have some text up in the top left, text in the top right. Another thing to know with this graphic is just the cutout selection. So if you ever really like a cutout or a player image, but the guy's back is to the camera, ideally you want the player face shot in there somewhere. So if it's a back shot, I would either have the back shot in the background like it is here and then a face shot in the foreground, or you might have like a player headshot in the background if the guy is like jumping up and making a catch or something in the foreground with his back to the camera. It's generally good to have your player's face in the graphic if you can help it. Another thing that's cool in this graphic is just the background texture they used. It looks like it might be some kind of blueprint of the stadium, and it's like super subtle but really nice at the same time too. And it's good that this top corner is lighter. That's where the light is coming from, and so you can see the detail, and then it kind of fades out as you get into the darker parts of the design. It just gives your eyes some more like little details to look at when you're looking through the design. Next, we'll look at this Saints example, and this graphic is so cool to me because it's using this Kodak film effect, but it's creating like a bunch of overlays of it over the same photo. So this effect was achieved by obviously having the main Kodak image, and it looks like they have a few different ones with different types of film. And you can watch my video on how to achieve this Kodak film effect, how to make it yourself. First of all, I love that they switched Kodak with New Orleans Saints. Very subtle but easy switch to make. And then the way they blow up some of these photos to like magnify those parts of the image, I think it's a really clever way to give a lot more to just a single player cutout or a single player image. So if you want to do something similar, I would start by, again, dragging in your player cutout. Here we can make this white background so we don't get lost in the details. But basically, if you were to make like some folders and then mask out certain portions, like maybe here, put a mask there. Let's make a new folder, put a mask on his face, and we can make a new folder and put a mask over here on his number maybe. And then I would just like duplicate this image into all of these groups. I'm just holding Option and clicking and dragging. Command T, blow these up, and then it's gonna like accentuate whatever is in the mask. Something like this is how you can achieve a similar effect. But obviously the Kodak effect that this graphic has going does a lot better job of this. And they're very subtle transformations too. Like it's a subtle zoom. It almost looks like the two continues outside this box, but you can see it is zoomed in. And then you can also see on the face, even though it like works when you're totally zoomed out, obviously these eyes are not at the same level, but that's okay. And again, with this effect, if you watch my video, this like green hue you see with some of the dark tones, that's a really nice way to sell this film effect, like this was actually taken on a Polaroid or Kodak camera, whatever. Also, nice consistency with like the little scribbles in this design. They're not overwhelming, but I like the circle on Days, same circle on Saints, and then you just have like a random scribble mark here. You have a random, very subtle silver scribble mark going over the 12, and it just kind of gives it this whole grittier feel with like a good noisy, grainy texture, and again, selling that film effect and making the whole thing cohesive. Also, anytime you can make the player cutout kind of pop out of whatever image or photo or background is housing them, like this main frame, you can see the cutout is popping out of the top. That just helps the design feel a little bit more 3D, gives it some more depth, and just overall makes it more interesting to look at rather than if he was completely housed within this rectangular frame. Next, we're gonna look at this Bengals example, and right away the typography jumped out to me as pretty unique, and it does a good job of separating from the rest of the crowd. Game on, leaning into this game theme of a game day graphic. Obviously it has this like pixely retro effect going on with the text. Really what stands out to me most with this graphic is just the consistency and the lighting. Like you can very clearly see the top right is where the light is coming from, and it's going down to the bottom left of the design. And that's reflected well on the player. You can see the right side is lighter, left side is darker. And then also all of these leaves kind of have the same brightness. You even get the player shadow going over this main leaf. You can see they masked the shadow just to affect the leaf and not the rest of the background. So a very clean lighting job. If you ever start with just like a plain background or even some kind of photo background and want to create sort of artificial light for your design, it's never a bad idea to just do a gradient overlay going from one of the corners to the opposite corner. So like if we had a new layer of white, for example, let's just make a gradient overlay going from, let's pick, I don't know, some kind of gray, and then we'll pick closer to white for the other color. And then I would switch the style to linear, and you could switch the angle to make it start in any of the corners, really. You can change the scale just to see the effect better. You have right now a gradient background where it's pretty clear the light is coming from the top left and it's darkening the bottom right. And if we were to like overlay this with any other solid color, like, I don't know, some kind of red, for example, instead of starting with like just a red background, you can put a gradient overlay on there and then just set the blend mode to overlay. And this kind of brightens the top left, darkens the bottom right in a subtle way. You're not making any sort of crazy gradient, but at the same time, it's lending itself to create some lighting for whatever players you're working on in the graphic. And if you don't know how to light players this effectively, I go over some techniques in my advanced lighting tutorial. You can check that out. And otherwise, there's just a lot of good lighting and player retouching videos on YouTube in general from other YouTubers, other designers. Definitely take the time to learn how to light your subjects well and make the lighting consistent throughout the graphic. That is going to be a huge difference maker in terms of your growth as a designer. Last example we'll look at is this Jets example. This is like the definition of a clean graphic. Obviously, white background. Also notice the cutout. The one they chose is wearing all white. So this white on white look does sell this like cleanliness effect to the whole design, and it really allows the green to pop off the page more. So if you ever are working with a white background and are just trying to make as clean a graphic as possible, it does kind of create a unique effect if you choose a picture where the player is wearing white, not their dark jerseys. Dark jerseys can also work on a white background, but like I said, I think using the player in the white jersey really allows the main team color to pop, and clearly they're playing with this pop in the background with these detail shots too. It's also important to note whenever you have like some sort of collage or collection of photos behind a main cutout, generally if you arrange them in any sort of like square or rectangle and keep things balanced, it's gonna turn out pretty good. So you can see like you have a big jersey number in the bottom left, big helmet in the top right, you have like more subtle text in the top left, some text in the bottom right, and it just feels balanced. It feels equally weighted. I also really like what they did with the background. Similar to the Mahomes graphic we saw for the Chiefs, they cut off this background just with a foreground shape, and that gives the player something to stand on. Like if you wanted to, you could just fade out the cityscape, but I kind of like the harsh divide. It just separates the subject from the background a little bit more. So there's a lot of nice detail in this graphic. And if you notice, there's not like any overarching texture going over the top of everything. Like there's not really any grain that I see. You have the textures in the jersey detail, but I feel like that is sort of accentuated by the fact there's not big overlays that are taking over the design. I hope this video was helpful. I am open to making more of these. Let me know what you think. If you want me to go through more examples of how I'd create certain effects, let me know in the comments below. I can also go through more of these kind of as the season progresses, go into other sports. I am primarily an ultimate graphic designer, but I do take inspiration and I appreciate the other sports graphics as well. So let me know what you think, and always happy to answer any questions.